Welcome to FiLMiC Live, our first in a series of live Q&A sessions where we'll be giving you the opportunity to dig deeper into hot tips and techniques for the ultimate mobile cinematography experience. Today, we're going to be talking with mobile cinematographer Cassius Rayner. Cassius is an award-winning producer, writer, director, and all-around nice guy. He's done work for the BBC, ABC, the UN, PBS, and others. And his recent work, London Falls Silent, is an extraordinary visual meditation on the impact that the pandemic lockdown had on London. Every scene, right, was shot on FiLMiC Pro using iPhone. And that's why you're here, Cass. I mean, you're here to teach us. Cass, it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. Really looking forward to this.
We're going to start today by digging into the techniques that Cass highlighted in the learning series that he produced with us. Videos we've been sharing for the past couple of weeks. But here are the ground rules. We're going to give you the opportunity to ask questions as we go. So be sure to leave your questions in the comments section. We'll try to get to as many as time permits. Before we get into it, Cass, one of the things I just want to say in the outset is that I've been following your work for a couple of years now, and it has never ceased to surprise and delight me that you are able to take these techniques, which you would traditionally think would be constrained to cinema camera systems and high-end gear, and you transpose those to mobile workflow. And a lot of what you've produced in this video series kind of speaks to that. But can you speak broadly to some of the challenges and the opportunities that transposition has presented you?
Oh, crikey. What a fantastic question, Chris. I wouldn't expect anything less. Yeah, I mean, the transition for me after 20 years of using mainstream camera systems and originally being trained in 35mm, 16mm, then the whole digital age, yeah, the crossover to mobile filmmaking, or even thinking about using a phone to try and shoot quality video on, was a long process. It was a long journey for me to explore, and I could really see in the early days the potential. And I'm talking back in 2014 when I first started to look at it really seriously as an option for me to explore creatively. Well, what can we do with this piece of technology? What can this tool do? And I'd seen an awful lot of photography at that point being done on mobile phones, and I was really fascinated by that. And I thought, well, if we can do that, then surely there's a lot we can do with film. And even at that point, there were a lot of other filmmakers already exploring the potential of mobile filmmaking. So it was a very exciting time to get into it. But the transition took a while, because it is a complete rethink. But the exciting challenge is the creativity that came with that, and that's what really excited me.
Extraordinary. The excitement, that word, I think, is very telling. This entire small community of mobile filmmakers has this infectious excitement that I have not seen since the days when the video DSLR workflow started to emerge. This seems to be game-changing, and there are a lot of recent developments in mobile videography that are continuing to rock the boat, as it were. The advent of 10-bit recording. Can you speak briefly? How would that impact the quality of your work?
Oh, wow. To go to 10-bit recording. Wow. is the biggest word I can come up with. Wow. I've yet to get my hands on the iPhone 12 Pro Max in particular, the one that I would like to get hold of. But I'm very excited, and I'm hoping soon to get hold of that phone. I think it opens up a whole new avenue of filmmaking with that, and particularly with the potential of the color grading that you can do with that. And it's just amazing that it's even come here. I didn't have an expectation that we get to 10-bit, but the fact that we have, and we have that potential is incredible, and I think a complete game changer as far as mobile filmmaking is concerned. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an exciting, it's just an exciting time. It's a revolution. I mean, this, as you've mentioned before with DSLRs, that was looked on as a revolution in indie filmmaking and low budget filmmaking,
Yes.
and giving opportunities for people who are not getting the money from the studios to go out and shoot huge movies, but have got fantastic stories to tell. And to get hold of a DSLR to do that was an amazing experience. But I really feel now with mobile filmmaking, we're in that place. We are in that zone right now.
If you're just joining us, this is FiLMiC Live, a Q&A session with filmmaker Cassius Rayner. Cassius, I don't want to belabor this anymore. You produced an amazing series of video tutorials where you focus on techniques. And ironically, the focus of this first video is focus. Let's start it.
Okay. So when I'm working on location, filming using a mobile phone and the FiLMiC Pro app, there are 2 or 3 key areas that I'm always looking for to make sure that I can get as much depth of field to my footage as possible. So I call that my FMB. So that means foreground, middle, and background. On location, I'm always looking for something that is in the foreground. I'm placing my actor in the middle area, and then obviously you have the background, which will then go soft focus anyway. But the foreground is what then gives you real depth to the image when you're pulling the focus into the middle area where your character actor is. Obviously using the focus peaking on FiLMiC Pro, which is really useful. That does help to really fine tune your focus point. And it is really fine, and it takes a lot of practice. You have to keep practicing with that focus wheel. So a lot of people have actually said to me over time that it's really difficult and tricky to get manual focus when you're using your gimbal with the FiLMiC Pro in a movement tracking shot. Yes, it is difficult, but it is possible, and it does take a lot of practice. So you just have to stick with it. The key is that you've got to make sure that you're keeping the same distance from your actor when you're moving and tracking with them. And obviously you have to set the focus on their head or their face or wherever it might be, so that the background does actually become soft focus. It can take 10 takes before you get that one shot that you need. So you need to have time, and you need to approach it in the same way as professional filmmaking. With an interior location, with this sequence, I locked the frame, and I'm again using my technique FMB. Foreground, middle area, and background. So I'm using props and furniture and different things to create the focus point that I want in the middle area. And it gives more depth to the actual image doing that. So playing with the focus is great fun. You can really explore some very creative and imaginative footage with it. Don't be scared to have shots out of focus when you start recording. And then when you move forward, or the actor steps towards you, they then come into focus. So sometimes it's great to rehearse a shot, find out where the actor's going to move within the frame, lock the focus at that point, and let your actor step back so they're out of focus, and then when they come in, they then nicely come into focus. It's the same with a tracking shot. You can start out of focus, and as you track into your actor or your object, then it comes into focus at that point.
I think you said it very well. It's tricky doing this. A lot of people think that mobile solutions should be easy, but the bottom line is techniques are techniques, and they need to be cultivated through practice. How long did it take you to kind of develop this technique?
Oh, goodness. I mean, I've been at it for 6 years, specifically using a mobile phone to shoot every type of content, from documentaries, music videos. And I've learned so much on every single project I've worked on. And I've been very fortunate to work in many different countries around the world using mobile phones and FiLMiC Pro. And just through those experiences, I've learned what works, what doesn't work. And you start to build up your own kind of notebook on, different environments, different climates, different weather, what works and what actually doesn't work. I think with focusing, that really was key for me as a filmmaker from a different background. after 20 years of being in mainstream. What fascinated me most at that point was, well, two things. Was the fact that you could correct the color temperature, the white balance, exposure, and the focus pull. And to have manual focus was really exciting, and still exciting as it is right now. And that took a long time to work out how subtle those movements were on the wheel. But I noticed the more I kept doing it, and the more I practiced with my moving and my gimbal shots, the more I just practiced with it, the more I realized that's the point I want. And in a way, it goes back to your old filmmaking skills, where you would actually put a little marker on the lens as to where you pull in the focus, where you know it's going to be sharp, and where it's going to go into soft focus. It's a little bit more subtle, obviously, on a mobile phone, and obviously the depth of field is different. Of course, it's different, but to achieve as much soft focus as you possibly can, I'd say to fine tune it, it took me way over a year of shooting a lot of stuff to really get to that comfortable point where I was really sort of like, I knew exactly where it worked and where it didn't.
We have a question from Courtney.
Courtney. Hey, thanks for coming on, Courtney.
Courtney says, I'm interested to know how data rates and file sizes are affected by HDR/Dolby Vision.
I think this is a question for you, Chris.
Sure. Well, I mean, we're learning just like you are. Obviously, there's more, those pipes need to be fatter, right? So right now, a rule of thumb, we've internally seen benefit up to plus 30% with the bit rates, but we've seen diminishing returns after that. So we are still in the process of optimizing our Dolby 10-bit HDR BT 2020 capture pipeline. But needless to say, we have an amazing product now, and it's going to get better. Now, will those file sizes end up expanding as we play around with the bit rates or the keyframe intervals? Maybe. It's too soon to tell. All right. Well, hey, I have a question for you, Cass. So FMB, you don't pronounce it FMB.
I love that. I'm taking that on. I like that. That's much better than what I came up with.
Your work has such a three-dimensionality to it. I mean, I guess I didn't. It's a small sensor. Like optically, there's not a lot going on there, right? It's really hard to do isolation, but you work with that relatively deep depth of field that the iPhone has. But one of the things I've noticed that you do is you focus with your feet. You have a fixed focal point, and you physically just move in. And you use that with FMB. You do that with layering. You have background out of focus. You have a midground that is coming into focus with those movements. And then you have this is the part that blows my mind. You are somehow able to get foreground objects out of focus. How close do you have to bring the phone to those foreground objects to make that happen?
Yeah, good question. Well, I'm as close as possible. As much as it will focus in at that point. So yeah, I mean, sometimes within just a few inches, if it's at all possible. I mean, I think the experience I found with particularly the focus pulling is, and the reason that I came up with FMB is because it's a very different. For me, it was finding a different technique that would give me that focus that I wanted, or something that I would be pleased with, because you're working with a mobile phone, and as you say, it's a very small sensor, and it's very different to how our DSLR functions. But I thought, no, there has to be a way of doing this. There has to be a way of doing this with the built-in lenses, and that was achievable by thinking about lighting, thinking about if you're on location, what kind of light source you have, and also the objects around you, props. You look around on location, and so I thought, well, if I actually started to place the actor in certain positions within the middle area, that really gives me more scope with the focus pulling to pull from the foreground to the middle area to the background. Something I wouldn't really need to consider, I guess, if I was on a mainstream camera system. But I was looking for a different technique that would give some focus. And so obviously having something in the foreground that's really out of focus just really accentuates that middle area sharp focus on the actor. And it's just a technique that works for me. It may not work for other people, but that's what I found worked for me using FiLMiC Pro.
Yeah, it's absolutely extraordinary. And I think one of the greatest compliments that a mobile filmmaker can get, and I'm about to give you this compliment, Cassius, buckle up,
Uh-oh.
is that when I look at your footage, it does not occur to me that it was shot with a phone whose sensor is the size of a blueberry. Absolutely extraordinary. You squeezed every drop of potential out of it. We have a few more questions. I'd like to treat those real quick.
Okay, Chris.
This is from Epic Tutorials. Do you use the telelens much in an effort to get better shallow depth of field?
Good question. Yeah, up until recently, I found with the iPhone, and I think it was nothing. This was nothing to do with FiLMiC Pro, but I found that the telephoto lens was giving me some issues on the iPhone. There seemed to be an awful lot of light fluctuation, and it wasn't locking. And that was nothing to do with FiLMiC Pro. As I explored the issue, that was more of an internal issue, which I won't go into now. But the tele lens I do use a lot with interviews to get some really nice depth, and it does work really well. But again, it depends on the lighting conditions. A lot. You know, the thing about mobile filmmaking is you have to treat it in the same manner as mainstream film, and you have to use, if you can, if you can get hold of lights and use lights, and in some cases you have to use a lot more than you would normally. But generally, no. If I'm out on location filming, if I'm working with the gimbal and I want some depth of field, I'd just be using the standard wide angle lens on an iPhone, not the telephoto.
Awesome. We have another question. It is from Ian Matthews. Good evening, Cassius and Christopher. That's me.
Hey, Ian. South London, I think Ian is. Yeah, cool.
You guys know each other?
No, I think I know Ian on Twitter, but I know that he is based in South London, I think. Yeah,
close enough. Question for Cassius. What are your favorite settings for slow motion, please?
Oh, well, I mean, it really... that really depends on... I used to go really crazy over 240 frames per second. And I think when I first explored that, I was just so excited by that sheer slow motion that I just got a bit carried away. And I got a bit of a reputation online as being the slow-mo man. But I do, as things have developed over the last few years, and as FiLMiC Pro has developed each year, and as the phones have developed, I tend to shoot 120 or at 60. So 60 FPS at 4K resolution, just for a nice little bit of slow motion. 120 FPS if I'm really, really wanting to go to town on something, whether it's dance or if I'm shooting a music video and that's something that's necessary in the shot. But I do like the 60 FPS quite a bit. I don't know. I hope that answers your question, Ian. But I think it's just exploring. You've just got to get out there and try different, variants of slow-mo and make a note of it. It's really important to either take a screenshot of your settings for each shot that you do. It really helps when you get back to the computer and you start, really assessing and digesting your shots, and then work out, okay, well, that was at that setting and I shot it at that time of day and the light was coming in from the left or the right. All these other aspects really hugely help when you're shooting a slow motion. It's really important to note down your environment and where you're at when you're actually filming those clips. I hope that helps.
I mean, such great points. One of the things that I think you need to keep in mind regarding slow motion is that slow motion isn't necessarily the most effective when it's the slowest you can possibly go. Our CEO and founder of FiLMiC, Neil Barham, he tends to shoot slightly slower than real time. And that lends a kind of filmic aesthetic in some situations. It's almost so subtle that you hardly notice it. But, slow motion, can be meted out in unexpected places to lend to the aesthetic. And I think Cassius is right. When the features first dropped, when we first got that capability, everybody was doing it. They didn't need an excuse. But now I think this is a great conversation. We have incredible slow motion. What's the best way to use it and when? We have many more questions coming in. I do want to move on. Keep those questions coming. And we're going to try and address as many as we can along the way, but there'll be some time at the end to go over some more questions. If you're just joining us, this is FiLMiC Q&A with filmmaker Cassius Rayner. We're going to start the next video. Its subject of focus is the art of exposure.
So mobile phone cameras can struggle with exposure. And when you're using FiLMiC Pro's app, my professional recommendation is that you always try to shoot at 148, which is twice the actual frame rate that I'm filming at. So generally I'll shoot at 24 frames per second. And so your shutter speed should be double that. Okay, then you get the best movement and motion in your recording, and you get more of a filmic look to it. If you allow it to run auto, the shutter speed number can get really high. Some of your shots may end up with some motion issues that you may not see until you've got into post-production, and then you think, well, why did it do that? And why did it jolt? Or why did it judder? Because the shutter speed is just too high. It's too high to the frame rate that you're filming at. But when you're shooting at 148 out on the streets, you do need to use an ND filter, neutral density. It's a bit like putting a pair of sunglasses on to your lens. Another reason why a neutral density filter is really useful, because you're able to keep your ISO levels as low as possible, and you're able to keep your shutter speed at 148 using the ND filter, you will find that the manual focus on the FiLMiC Pro app is brilliant, and you'll actually get really nice depth of field to your images. Now, if you run everything automatic when you're out in the streets filming, you will find that it may look a bit flat. You will have less control over the manual focus. So try to avoid that if you can. Use the manual controls, keep your ISO down, use an ND filter where possible, and then you'll have an awful lot more fun using the manual focus, and you'll find that you can pull focus. And as I've mentioned before in my other videos, keep in mind your actual FMB. So your foreground, your middle area, and your background. And by using an ND filter, you'll still get some really nice depth to your images using the FiLMiC Pro app.
You know, this has been a topic of endless confusion for a lot of people. This is a question I hear often. What the heck is an ND filter, and why do you guys keep telling us to use one? Cassius?
Well, I mean, neutral density, that's what ND stands for, neutral density filter. So basically it's a piece of glass. I mean, the simplest way of explaining it is like a pair of when you put a pair of sunglasses on, you're out on a bright sunny day, you know, and it's just a bit too much, the exposure on your eyes. So you put a pair of sunglasses on. By using an ND filter, it doesn't actually affect your shutter speed setting and your f-stop. You know, it's all about being able to keep the f-stop at f1.8 on your lens, so that it's as open as possible, so that you can get as much depth of field to the image as possible without it being affected. So using the ND filter helps you through that process. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's basically what it is. It's and there's different grades of ND filter, and I mean it's a whole other world. And I would actually recommend that if anyone's interested in exploring ND filters and the differences in the makes and the glass, the quality, you know, what it does for your exposure, then I would check out richardlackey.com. Or his YouTube channel. He's done some fantastic example pieces on defilters and explains it really well in really nice, simple terms, and gives variants of different types of ND filters and what works and what doesn't work. But ND filter is just part of filmmaking. You would always have, you know, you should always have an ND filter in your kit bag, ready to attach. I mean, it's you know, mobile phones, tiny processor, tiny little chip. There's only so much it can cope with in daylight, and to get the best quality out of FiLMiC Pro, because you really can, you need to get that ND filter on there if you're out in the daylight filming.
Yeah, the theory of exposure is a complicated one, and I think it's something that scares a lot of people away when you talk about it. It's like, hey, are you familiar with the exposure triangle? You know, the exposure triangle. You know, it's ISO, the innate sensitivity of the photodiodes, but that can vary with voltage. And then there's shutter speed, which is actually a scan rate on a CMOS chip. And then there's aperture, which may be fixed, it may not be fixed based on the optical assembly. And when you say all that stuff, people's heads spin and they fall over and then they
Yeah.
seize, and it's not great. But the thing
Would
is,
the,
with it's not, it doesn't have to be as complicated as that. And I think your simple advice of just use an ND filter, you can reap the benefits of that 180-degree shutter rule.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you're shooting, if you're shooting at 24 frames per second in 4K resolution, obviously your shutter speed is set at 1/48th. And keep that ISO down. But by doing that, of course, if you haven't got an ND filter on and you're shooting in a bright sunny day, or even an overcast day, you will find you've got some exposure issues. So that's when you need to put a pair of sunglasses on the phone. It makes all the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that illustration, by the way. We do have some questions coming up. The first question is this from Myalas. Forgive me for mispronouncing it. Myalism Films. Hi, Cassius.
Hey.
Would you go for a variable ND or rather use a solid one as to avoid color shifts or vignetting? Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah, so I have actually explored both types. I've never been wholly happy with variable NDs unless you're going for the really expensive top range variable NDs. And it's just, I don't know, sometimes I feel it's just a bit crazy on price. But I have explored different variable NDs and I've never been overly pleased with the results. And there are some issues in color shifts on variable NDs. I really would stick to a set solid ND. I always make sure in my kit bag I've got an ND8, an ND16, an ND32, and even sometimes I have an ND64 with me.
And Cass, if those are high quality NDs, that is, they don't have overt color casts, can you stack them if you need to?
Yes, and I have done. There've been on many occasions, particularly if I'm doing some gimbal shoots in daylight. I have added an ND 8 and a 16 on top of that. I mean, it really depends on the glass that you're working with. The NDs that I tend to use are very mid-range, but I've always been very happy with the results.
Yeah, we do have some more questions. The next one is from Rivu Banjer-G. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Do you think iPhone camera exposure is much, much better than any other smartphone? I find it best.
Okay, so I mean, it's Rivu, if we're pronouncing it correctly. Accept my apologies if I haven't. I am aware of your work. I have seen some of your stuff on Twitter. It's really great what you're doing, and I wish you the very best with it. But in answer to your question, I mean, I don't shoot with Androids, and that's not because I don't want to shoot with Androids. It's just because my workflow has always been through Apple, and so there was just a natural progression for me to go down iPhone. So I can't really say iPhone is the best. I have seen some test footage from Android phones and some of the newer models, and I've been absolutely blown away at the quality. But I can't really answer that question in full because I'm not someone who test shoots with an Android phone and an iPhone. I've only ever really worked with an iPhone. So of course that it's what works for me, but it might not work for other people. But Android is really sort of, I think, chasing it as far as the quality of lenses in their newer models.
Absolutely. And I just want to speak to Android for a moment.
Yeah.
They're doing some amazing things with color science. Keep in mind the intensity on that side of the technological pond is absolutely intense. They're in an arms race with each other, and the consumer is benefiting. And you can choose Android devices that have different attributes. Keep in mind that the Sony Android phones of all devices actually tend to bring these world-changing features to market first. Right? They have great exposure compensation. If you're looking for great exposure management, they have it. but they were the first to market with 10-bit. They were the first to market with this extraordinary slow motion capture. So Android phones, I don't think are inferior. I think that's the wrong way to frame it. I think Android phones are different. And depending on what you want out of that mobile platform, it may or may not be the right choice for you. It's a personal decision. We do have some other questions. I'd like to go to the next one. It's from Mark Blank Settle.
Hey, Mark.
When moving from light areas to dark, or vice versa, does Cass manually ride exposure with the left wheel, or does he use the wider exposure sampling reticle and trust that it does the job he wants?
No, I don't adjust anything. I will set my exposure for that shot. I like shadows. I like contrast. So, I mean, it really depends if I'm going from light from a window to a silhouette within a room or whatever the movement is. I will pre-plan those shots and look at it as to what the exposure is going to be. I would never mess with the exposure right in the middle of recording, if that's what you're suggesting, by manually using the exposure wheel. It's not something I would do in a record.
Guys, we have so many good questions coming down
The
pipe. we do have to move on to the next segment. If you're just joining us, this is a Q&A session with filmmaker Cassius Rayner. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. We're moving on to the next segment, and this is a good one. Episode 3, the subject is interior low light shooting.
Oh. The first one is what I call controlled low light. So it's actually me that's controlling the light source, whether I'm using one single light, whether I'm using 2 lights or 3 lights, whatever it might be, I'm actually controlling it on the location and I'm controlling the light source. And so that helps me with FiLMiC Pro to get the shots that I need. So for example, under a controlled lighting situation, I have one light. I'm filming to me the actor stepping into the light for a moment and then stepping back. So I'm setting my ISO really low as possible on that. Obviously shutter speed must be 1/48. You will notice, you will think, oh my God, I can't see much. There's too much shadow. It's looking really dark. That's better. I know what it is I want. I want the light to hit her face as she steps into it. I want the darkness and the shadows, so that actually works for me, because in post-production, when you use the LUT, whether you're shooting D-flat or D-log, then it will crush the blacks even more for you and give you a very clean, sharp image. One of the main things that we need to really think about is you can't get rid of noise, okay? Noise will be there, but it's about how do you reduce it as much as possible. Another key area when you're filming in low light and you're controlling it with lighting, make it more concentrated than you would normally. If you're standing in the space, it will look like you've got a lot of light going on and it's not going to get you the effect that you want. It will do. If you're concentrating the light source in a specific area, keep the ISO as low as possible, keep your shutter speed at 1/48, shoot with the log capture if you have it installed, and then you'll be happily surprised when you get to the actual edit and you start crushing the shadows and the black areas, you get lovely pickup on the actual light source that you were using.
You know, Cassius, before we went into that video, you made a statement that kind of stuck to my bones. You said, I love shadows. And by the way, if you're a manufacturer of smartphones and you're watching this, Cassius loves shadows. There's this silly trend among a lot of camera manufacturers and mobile phone we're going to pull all the details out of the shadows. We don't want them all the time. Sometimes those deep, inky shadows are the aesthetic that we want. And the things that you do, they look harder than they are, to be honest. Like you have a static pool of light that the talent walks to and through, and it looks incredible.
Thank you.
I really wish we could dive deeper on this subject. Fortunately, we do have another video after this, but you talked about the 148 shutter rule. I'd like to go into that a little bit more. Can you explain to me why? I mean, a lot of people are familiar with the 148 or the 180 degree shutter rule. But why, as filmmakers, do we strive for that?
Well, crikey! I mean, you could go back into the history of when film was first invented on that particular subject. But I mean, for me, it's the closest that I've found working with the mobile phone, because obviously it's slightly different in shutter speed, but it's double whatever the frame rate is that you're going to record at. But it's the motion. I don't want hard edges when I'm filming, and maybe that's because I come from originally being taught in 35mm film. Maybe my eyes are still in that world, but I'm looking for a little bit more softness, and motion and movement. I find is best when it's set at 148 at 24 frames per second. I'm not interested in hard edges to the image, and it's just a personal thing. It's just a thing that I enjoy exploring, and it does give a little bit more softness to the image, but also it just seems to work really well with the focus pulling. It gives me the most expanse that I can get, by setting it at that. That's what I've found so far.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I find that at high shutter speeds, video looks staccato. It looks like a soap opera. You can
Yeah.
see those discrete frames, and the illusion of fluid motion is destroyed. So 180 tends to be the rule of thumb, but again, like all things in filmmaking, it's not a hard dogma, right? If you need to use a 190 degree shutter or something like that, you can do that, whatever works for you. We have one really good question coming in. It's from Niels. I'm wondering what max ISO Cass will use to get correct exposure, considering that noise is a notorious issue with mobile phones, even the latest iPhones. And does he have a post workflow to denoise?
Great question. Cool. Okay. So the first thing is I never use a denoiser. I don't use any software in post-production to denoise my images. My attitude is old school. If I haven't captured it correctly in the camera at the time of filming it, it's not good enough and it needs to be reshot. I want to avoid as much as possible having to correct issues in post-production. It's just a method that I don't personally enjoy. So I'm not going to go there. A good camera operator will do everything possible in camera before getting to post-production. So I don't use a denoiser. The images that you see in my films and my projects are as very close to what they were when I shot them. There might be some tweaking with highlights and contrasts and the shadow areas, but I don't use a denoiser. So the other thing that I have found is just don't mess with the ISO. You've got on FiLMiC Pro, you need to keep that ISO number as low as possible, and you have to work around that. And if it means you've got to get some extra light in, then that's what you need to do. Or you need to seek out and find light if you're working in a low light situation. I've found over the years that if you push the ISO over 50, you're going to get really annoying noise issues that you're going to have to clean in post-production. And why go there? It just takes a bit of practice. Keep the ISO as low as possible, whether you're shooting daylight with an ND filter or whether you're shooting inside under low light and you're just using one light, whatever it might be. Keep that ISO as low as possible. And when you go into log capture, it really does. It's brilliant, to have that little extra dynamic range, which it really does give you, in D log or D flat, whatever your choice is. And I do, usually record with that because it gives me that little bit of extra in post-production to really punch in that black area, that shadow. It just gives me a little bit extra to work with. And wherever I've punched the light in on that person's face, then using the highlight, I can lift the highlights and they light up perfectly, and I can still keep the blacks down without having to use a denoiser. So I hope that helps.
So, like, if I could just reduce this down to a statement, how do you manipulate the ISO? Really don't, right? Try to keep it base. Yeah. And this kind of comes back to like the broader point that we're talking about today, is these techniques of independent filmmaking that have been cultivated over the past 30 or 40 years, they translate directly over, right? So if you need to control the light, you need to always be in control of the light. And that may mean taking gaffer tape and a vinyl shower curtain and putting it over a window. Do what you have to do. Be creative, control that light. And in terms of like manipulating the image in post, I can just tell you as a color engineer, when you manipulate an image, you are more likely to damage it than you are to enhance it. We have another question. It's from Ian.
Anyway.
Shutter speed question, 50 or 60 hertz flicker from lighting or screens. Do you still stick to a 148 or do you use the nifty override in FiLMiC Pro?
Oh, good question, Ian. I'm impressed with that. That's a really good question. It would really depend on the scenario. I mean, it's a good question. I mean, in documentaries, there have been many situations when I've been filming in different countries that you're in the moment. It's live. You've got seconds to get your shot to capture that moment, and sometimes you have no choice, and you need to just go into auto. Just let FiLMiC Pro app actually do the auto for you on exposure and shutter speed, and just and generally I've always been happy with the results in that situation. But if I'm on a shoot that's pre-planned, whether it's a music video or a drama that I'm shooting, then of course I'm working out my shots. We have the time to digest it and make sure that we're getting the right shots at the right settings. The only other times I come with flicker issues in slow motion. That's another big area that has an issue is flickering that occurs in slow motion. But generally, no, I would always be sticking to 148.
Cass, we have to move on to our final segment. If you're just joining us, this is a FiLMiC Q&A with mobile filmmaker Cassius Rayner. Our next segment is exterior low light shooting.
So any type of night shoot that you may have to do with a mobile phone is really, really tricky and can be very hard to get the right image that you want that hasn't got lots of noise and gain in the image. And it just can be a real struggle. So when you're filming at nighttime, you need to be working out where are the light sources. Are they coming from shop windows? Are they coming from lampposts? Is it coming from neon lights? Is it coming from big signs, TV screens? Whatever light source is there that's projecting enough for you to capture what you need in your scene. Now, I do use a couple of extra things, and surprisingly, I use a kitchen cabinet light, a tubular light that gives me huge diversity and obviously allows me to get just a bit extra light on the actor when I'm filming. And you can make it look like that it's naturally coming from a window light as well. Now, what you will find is that if you've got some kind of light source from a lamppost or a window, that area will be lit and you will see that, but obviously you're going to have huge shadows. It's going to go very, very black across your phone. Now, don't be scared of that. Don't think that you need to be able to see in those areas. Don't try and lift it. As soon as you do that, you're going to end up with noise issues. If it looks really black and dark and you can't see any detail, that's okay, because you will pick up some detail when you get it onto a bigger screen to edit. You just can't see it on the phone. And if you're using log capture on FiLMiC Pro, which is it's a brilliant part of FiLMiC Pro, try to not mess with the shadows or the highlight areas. If you're going to go in D flat or D log, then great, set it at that, but leave it. You will find that it will give you a little bit more dynamic range in the post-production, and you can either just lift the shadows a little bit or crush the blacks even more to make it darker. It's entirely up to you. You do need light. Concentrate the light source in one area and don't worry about the shadow areas.
People have been saying this for years, that cameras are essentially just light gathering devices. That's all they are. And one of the points that you made in that video that really stuck out to me was you're not afraid to embrace the ambience of the scene. If it's dark, it's dark. And you make that work. And you mix environmental light sources, which I think is absolutely brilliant, and subtle artificial lights to do some fill in the face and things like that. It's absolutely extraordinary. It's not like you're trying to fight nature. You're using it. You're using your environment.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So, what a lovely way of putting it. Yeah, I think yes, it is. It is that, and you work with what you have, and we have this fantastic tool. And I've been an avid user of FiLMiC Pro for the last 6 years. And I've enjoyed every single shoot that I've worked with FiLMiC Pro. But like anything, there are limitations to what it can do and what it can't do. Technology is technology; it advances. But at the point that you're filming, you work with what you've got. You know what it can do, and you know what it can't do, and that's the thing that you have to try out. You need to test shoot and work out. Okay, that doesn't work. But if I put a little bit of a punch light in there, a little bit of fill light, that brilliant, that works. And that's all it is. It's just exploring what the tool can do really well and what it can't do, and avoid that, and work with what it does really well. And that for me, I think low light was a really big thing, because I think noise has always been a massive issue with mobile phones for some years. And it is improving, it is getting better, but you still need to think about, all those different issues, and having a filmmaking background does help in sort of working through a plan on, okay, a little bit of fill light. And what I found by exploring is that I didn't want standard video LED lights when I'm shooting naturally out in the streets and I've got an actor or a model walking through the streets, because that kicks off too much light and it makes it look really fake, and it, like you're doing a news broadcast or something. I wanted something that was subtle, but just enough to get the features on the face, just so it blended into the background. It blended into the environment that they were actually walking through. And I found a kitchen cabinet light, because it was tubular and had a little bit of a control on dimming and highlighting. It just punched in enough light without it looking like some big spotlight being thrown on them. And it's just exploring that. And that's what I love about working with mobile phones, is that sometimes it's just the craziest of things that works.
Yeah, it's you mentioned kind of like this principle that I think is important for anybody to keep in mind, whether they're using a high-end mirrorless camera or DSLR or an ARRI Alexa or FiLMiC Pro, is you have to understand the performance envelope that you're working within, right? If you're shooting with FiLMiC Pro on the latest generation devices, you're using log V2, and you're expecting to push up the shadows 8 stops in post, it's not going to work out for you. You have to be aware of those limitations, and you have to work within them. We do have some questions. I'd like to go on to the first one. From Eminem. I have an older iPhone.
The Eminem, or
yeah, I think it's the Eminem.
whoa.
Thank you for joining us. I'm humbled. I have older iPhone 7. Can I still get good low light footage with proper techniques and tools? Oh, that's a phenomenal question.
Absolutely, 150%. Of course you can, because it's all about what you add in addition to it. So yeah, I mean, the iPhone 7's, it's a good phone. It's got a decent lens on it. I mean, I still shoot some sequences. I still shoot now in 2020. I still use my iPhone 6s, because I just prefer that lens on certain specific shoots I'm doing. So absolutely, if you think it through exactly what it is you want to capture, and if it needs extra light, if you're looking at something and it needs a bit of extra light, punch in a bit of extra light. The iPhone 7 will capture it absolutely fine. And it is all about learning the techniques. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Keep in mind that the pioneers of mobile filmmaking were working on iPhone 5Ss and 6s back in the days when the total dynamic range of those devices was 6.5 stops. They were doing amazing things. They were doing things like just throwing their exposure down and doing subtle lifts. They were doing environmental lighting. Like, it doesn't matter what innate limitations you have, you can overcome them with a little prep and creative thinking. We have another question. It's from Haunts.
Haunts. Okay.
Haunts. Do you use an iPhone because that's your environment, or because it's superior to high-end Android devices? Oh,
well, that touches on a slightly similar question earlier. No, I mean, the answer to that is iPhone superior to an Android device? I don't think of it like that. I just happen to use an iPhone. It was just something that worked in my workflow because I've always been Mac based. I've always worked with iMacs and MacBook Pros, and it just, when I got into the whole smartphone world, it just seemed to make more sense to keep the workflow connected like that. So I just went down the iPhone route. Is iPhone better? I can't say that it's better than an Android. I mean, everyone has their own preferences, and there are some fantastic Android phones out there right now. There are some amazing ones. So, it's personal preference.
Yeah, we seem to be getting this question a lot. And, honestly, we always do when we open up these kind of public forums. Here's the thing. They're different. One is not better than the other. They have different strengths and advantages. Our next question is the best camera. I guess it's a statement. Can we go back to that one? Made on mobile TV. The best camera is the one you have on you. That is so well put.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that is definitely the principle of all filmmaking, is that you work with what you have, and you can do amazing things with it. So yes, Courtney, I totally agree with you. Yeah.
All right, we have some other questions. Some are, the real VIP. How do you deal with the light globes of light sources when shooting on iPhones?
I'm not sure I wholly follow the question. Light globes.
I think he's probably talking about problematic light sources. Like, how do you moderate those, or how do you compensate for them?
I mean, the thing is, you have to control. You have to be in control of the light source as much as possible. I mean, it really depends on the environment that you're filming in. I mean, for example, if you were doing a night shoot with a mobile phone, and there were some extreme, sharp light sources that were hitting the lens, or you were getting a bit of reflection coming off the actual glass of the lens that you didn't want, I would actually shoot with NDs, and I have. Even at nighttime, I've actually used an ND filter.
Really?
Yeah, to actually tone that down a bit. It's a tricky question because it really depends on the environment that you're in. But generally, I would always say, you're the chief. You're the one that's filming, so you need to be in control of the light source that's around you. You have to take control of it.
Now, at this time, we're going to be opening up to more general questions. So if you're in the comments and you'd like to ask Cassius, well, anything, feel free to do so. We have another one. This has to do with remote, I believe. Smartphone filmmaker Cassius, I've seen you use FiLMiC Remote for your gimbal and monopod shots, but how physically do you get a smooth shot with this very tricky technique?
Okay. Smartphone filmmaker. Oh, I think, isn't that Rob? Hi, Rob. Thanks for coming on. Firstly, just nice one on your YouTube stuff. Really great stuff. Keep it up, mate. Really good. So, FiLMiC Remote. Yes, I do use FiLMiC Remote a lot, and gimbal monopod shots. But how physically do you get a smooth shot with this very tricky technique? I get perfect smooth shots because I've been doing it too long. Again, it's just. I mean, I guess it's hard to explain. I mean, some people explain. They call it the ninja walk. With gimbals when you.
I was going to say, I didn't know if you called it that. The ninja
no, I
walk.
don't. I call it the glide. So I like to think of myself as a bird of prey flying, and I'm going in at a steady rate, and I want to get that sense and that movement and that feeling. And I think maybe because I was trained as a Steadicam operator in the film industry, and I'd used Steadicam systems for a number of years, you just get into that mode and you get to understand movement and what you physically have to do to get those smooth shots. With FiLMiC Remote, if anything, it's of huge benefit to me when I'm using it on location. I mean, I wouldn't be able to get those really high or low angle shots without using FiLMiC Remote. And to be honest, when you shoot anything, Rob, it could take 15 takes before you get the shot that you're happy with. So it is a case of, as it is in the film industry, you just keep shooting and getting the takes until you're happy with the one that you've got. And then you've got your smooth shot. I mean, things go wrong. You know, I've been hit by cars because I'm
Worth it though.
running across the roads or whatever, filming, you know, chasing actors. So you know, and I've fallen into ditch holes, and you know, I've crashed into bushes, and I've gone over brick walls, and so you know, those shots you'll never see. But you'll all, you know, there's always one smooth shot, and you go, that's the one.
You know, I will not say that I'm a practitioner of the ninja walk, whatever you call it, but it's a matter of practice. You know, the more you do it, the easier it will be. And if you want to do this at home and make your family and friends think that you're self-medicating, you certainly can do this. But it really is a matter of practice. If you want to master that technique of walking, it is all in the legs. You just got to do it.
And can I just add one extra thing, Chris, just very quickly?
Yes.
The excitement for me with doing tracking shots and gimbals, particularly with a mobile phone, is that in mainstream film, it can take a long time to get these shots set up and to go through the whole rehearsal, get the shot that you need. There's usually, you know, there's a certain number of crew, et cetera, et cetera. And the one thing that really got me when I got into mobile filmmaking was the excitement of how bloody quick you can do it and how quick you can set it up. And it is, like you say, just practice. And you can, you know, I mean, people see me running down the street looking like I'm a chicken, but you know, if I get the shot, I get the shot, you know. But it's just the fact that you can just do it, you know, in minutes. You can just bang, get the shot, done, move on to the next location. That really creatively excites me and challenges me.
We have another question from a random Australian. Question from Chris. Your webcam looks amazing. What model is it? Actually, I'm not using webcam at all. I'm using FiLMiC Pro, and it's in clean HDMI out mode. So if you are on the chat, if you're joining us today and you would like a high quality alternative to a webcam, and you already have an iPhone or an Android phone, buried in those menus is a clean HDMI. Yes, it's a shameless plug. Clean HDMI out. So part of the base app. Start using it, guys. Do we have any other general questions?
Brilliant.
Here we go. Haunts.
Or just comments, yeah.
Yeah, just say things. Just tell us nice things.
Yeah.
Is there a benefit to using image stabilization on both the camera and the gimbal? Ooh.
Yeah, no, a really good question. I mean, and again, I think it's down to personal exploring as to what works for you. I don't use FiLMiC Pro stabilization. I turn it off when I'm using a gimbal. I do find sometimes there can be conflict between the two, but you know, it's just different methods and different way and techniques to work with. So that's just my very own personal opinion.
And it's a good one. I generally recommend that if you're using mechanical stabilization to turn off any form of digital stabilization or in-body stabilization. But that isn't always true depending on what you're doing. Maybe you're on a surface that's moving back and forth like a boat and you need anti-jitter and you need that mechanical stabilization. So it's going to depend on what you're doing.
And there was a time as well, Chris, that and I don't, you know, there should be a warning sign up. I don't advise you to do this, but on my old iPhone 8 Plus and things like that, I used to use a magnet. It locked.
Oh boy, yeah.
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
Okay, I have
debate.
to.
It's a big debate.
Stop it. No, we can't encourage people to do that. Okay, so technically that will work. We've had people in the past that I know of, and I would never suggest you do this, but you can actually stick a high power magnet on the back of your phone. It will stabilize the solenoid spring assembly, and it will keep it from jittering. This can destroy your device. Don't do it, okay? Just let crazy people like Cass experiment with that sort of thing. We have another question from C. Fazio. Do you use anamorphic lenses or do you crop?
I do. I mean, again, depends on the production, but I do use both. You know, I shoot a lot in FiLMiC Pro using the 2:9 ratio. I just personally love it. It's what I like to it. Some people have said to me, why the hell are you doing that? You know, why are you cropping your image like that? But I'm used to working in that kind of frame. And that's just because of my background. So I'm really happy with that. And it just gives me something extra that I personally really enjoy. And particularly, I love it when I'm shooting with that crop and I put it into LumaFusion, which is an editing app, and it gives me that true wide frame when I go to export, and oh man, I love that. That's just, I don't know, it makes me feel like I'm a movie maker, so I enjoy that. And I use Moondog anamorphic lens. I love Moondog anamorphic lens. Really, again, I always plan what it is I'm shooting. I don't just shoot tons of stuff using an anamorphic lens, but when I do use an anamorphic lens, I do use the Moondog.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to that for a moment. We have people who continually ask us what is the best anamorphic, and this is kind of like a what's the best phone kind of question. They
Yeah.
have different attributes, and really the current generation of mobile anamorphics are all very good optically. They have varying degrees of distortion and vignetting, but really what makes or breaks an anamorphic lens is the inter-element coatings, and they're all very good. Some of them have blue casts, some of them have green casts. The best, most neutral inter-element coatings, like Cassius said, I believe come from Moondog, but maybe that's not what you like. I encourage you, if you're looking into buying an anamorphic lens, do some research and see which aesthetic works for you. We have another question. It's from Rivu. Question: which one is your favorite gimbal? And what are your options on what are your opinions on DJI, Osmo 2, gimbal? By the way, loving the series. Watch them
Thank you.
all.
Well, thank you for loving it. I appreciate that. It means a lot to me. Firstly, it's very difficult putting yourself out there to say, hey, this is what I do and this is how I film and stuff. At the end of the day, I'm just a filmmaker. So I hope what I share just helps others and just, supports them on their journey, because that's all it's about. It's not me being an expert, and I'm not an expert. I'm still learning. Even in my old age, I'm still learning about different techniques all the time. So DJI, I've never really been a big user of DJI. When I started exploring different devices, I mean, my actual old workhorse tool is a Smooth 4 by, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. It's Xion. No, because the Z, what is it, Chris? I can't remember how you pronounce.
Don't make me do that.
No, okay.
I can't. I don't know.
You're not going to go there. All right. But I use the Smooth 4. It's something that works really well for me. It's got solid weight. The thing about gimbals is that there are a lot of gimbals coming on the market that are very driven by consumerism and by, leisure and tourism, and something that's light, folds up, goes in your pocket, and that's all fantastic. But because they're so light, you actually find that you're going to get even more issues with the smoothness of your shots because they have no weight to them. And the Smooth 4 for me works really well. It still has really good weight to it. And that bit of extra weight actually helps me to lock my wrists in place, keeps my arms steady in the movement. Whereas the lighter the object is, the more it starts just floating around a bit too crazily. I mean, again, that's just my own personal experience. DJI is fine. It's great, and a lot of people like DJI, and that's great. It doesn't work for me personally. It's not something I would use on a professional shoot.
Well, I mean, I wish we could keep going on. There are plenty of questions that we weren't able to get to, unfortunately, but I've had a great time. I hope that you have, Cass. We are sadly out of time.
Oh man, I thought we were going to sit back, have a glass of wine, and carry on the chat.
Cass, I just want to thank you for joining us again. These insights are extraordinary. It is invaluable to hear just good practical advice coming from somebody who really consumes this product and lives in this workflow. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope that you get to join us again. And for everyone who's watching, I hope that you've enjoyed this production. I think we'll be doing some more of these. In fact, we are lining up our second installment of FiLMiC Live in just a few weeks, so be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook for details when that will be coming out. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next time on FiLMiC Live Q&A.
Thank you. It's been awesome.